Hello and welcome to the Might and Magic 4 and 5 World of XEEN Setup Guide, in which I will try and explain how to achieve the more or less perfect setup for the game. And if something is incorrect or missing, do point out that in the comments. So, how to set it up? Well, in order to answer this question, I need to first have a version overview of how this game actually evolved over time. So first, in 1992, New World Computing released Might and Magic 4 Clouds of XEEN, which was actually a floppy version. It came on a floppy and you could just install it as a separate game. Then, in 1993, they released Might and Magic 5 Darkside of XEEN, which was also a floppy version. And interestingly enough, if both of these games were installed at the same time, you would get a game called Might and Magic World of XEEN, which combines both of them together into one whole, so you can play both games from a single place. And it also added a few bonus levels and whatnot. So that's that, but that's not all. In 1994, they released Might and Magic World of XEEN CD version. It came on 2 CDs, and the CDs are, of course, something that hold a lot more information than the floppies. So what they put on the CDs is voice acting. And voice acting for every single NPC in the game. That's a lot. And also, just for identification, they changed a bit the title screen of the game. So instead of a big orb with an X on it, you get a spinning CD to identify it as the CD version. And of course, in the options screen, you get the text and speech options, so that you could disable speech from the CD, or you could also disable text, which then works as subtitles instead. So yes, that's that. Oh yeah, and there's also a different setup utility to copy files on disk. Right now you can see it on the screen here. It says version 2.1, that's probably the installed program version. Probably the floppy version is 1 point something. It says CD-ROM here, and there's also the New World Computing logo here. It's a bit different from the floppy version. I'm not entirely certain how different, because I always use the CD version because it's obviously superior due to the sound options. But I don't think it's very different. So yes, this is also running on DOSBox. So that's probably obvious, because all of the versions are DOS versions. And so let's start talking about how to get it working in the best way. So, I am personally using something called a DOSBox game launcher. Yeah. And it's just a utility program for quickly launching all kinds of DOSBox games, which works cross-platformly, so it's pretty nice. In here you can see how it looks like. You could also get everything to work without any additional programs, but it's a lot of work entering manually commands and editing configuration files and whatnot, so I would recommend using something like this. I know Defend Reloaded is something that is similar to this and whatnot, but I'll just go over with DOSBox Game Launcher. So let's start with the audio, which is by far the hardest part, and it is the one place that I'm not entirely certain what is the perfect setup for it. And in order to explain how best to set this all up, I have to go a bit further into the sound card history. Now you can refer to my sound card history video for Might and Magic 3 Hours of Terra, It mostly applies to this game as well, but I do want to add some expanding specifically for World of XEEN, so that you could understand all the additional options this one has. So if you go to the setup program, one thing that you can see is different from at least Might and Magic 3 is that you get to select digitized speech hardware and also digitized effects and music hardware. They are separate now instead of being in one config as it was before. And as you can see, there are 10. There are 10 in digitized speech and also 10 in music. So it's kind of like 20 sound cards being supported, which is hilarious amount, because my Magic 3 Isles of Terra only supported 7 sound cards, so that's quite a lot. Well, actually this game doesn't support that many, because some of these are duplicates of one another, so yeah. I went over most of them in the My Magic 3 Isles of Terra video, so I won't really go over them again. But the new things I will point out. So, first of all, digitized speech. The first 5 I covered, and the rest one I will cover here. 7 and 8, Disney Sound Source and Kovacs Soundmaster 2. Not really sure how they differ, but they both are Disney Sound Source, also known as the Kovacs speech thing. It was a cheap early sound card. It wasn't very good at its quality, but it was quite common. That's why many games of this era did have support for it. But to our setup, it's not really interesting because it's too low quality. And I'm also not too sure why it's not recognizing it. You can see stars put on those things that the game automatically detects. And even though Disney Sound Source here you can see is enabled, somehow the game doesn't recognize it. I'm not too sure why, but it doesn't really matter either. So then, the other options. 6 and 0. Pro Audio Spectrum and Pro Audio Spectrum Alt. Also, I have to point out that there is a lot of typos in this place. It's not Pro Audio Spectrum, it is Pro Audio Spectrum. The dash is in the wrong place. So, yeah, and such thing as the Pro Audio Spectrum Alt doesn't even exist. Maybe it's the Pro Audio Spectrum Plus or something. But yeah, I'm not too sure why it's written like that. Anyway, the Pro Audio Spectrum, as you can see, is not really emulated by DOSBox. Just for curiosity's sake, it is a sound card that was actually considered to be a rival to the Sound Blaster 16. It also used the Yamaha OPL3 sound chip, and the reason why it was quite popular back in the day is that it came with CD drives for CD audio, already preset so that both the sound card and the CD drive is compatible with each other, which was quite convenient. And for things that need CD audio, of course, it was quite useful. Now, World of XEEN does need CD audio for all the speech, but DOSBox handles it all quite nicely by itself, so you don't need to worry about the Pro Audio Spectrum. So, other than that, the Pro Audio Spectrum was actually quite short-lived because the parent company of it closed down due to financial fraud. Good job. It was apparently something else, and it was one of the biggest financial fraud cases in the Silicon Valley. Not too sure what that is about, because I don't really see much information on that on Wikipedia, but oh well. Apparently that was something else. Okay, so next we have, of course, the number 9, Sound Blaster 16. I already talked about it in the previous video, but it bears repeating that Sound Blaster 16 uses the Yamaha PL3, and it had some improvements in terms of sound synthesis for speech and whatnot, so it's definitely the best choice from all of the cards you can see here. And I will also go back to the Sound Blaster 16 a bit later. But so for the digitized speech hardware, you definitely want to select 9. That is the only real option that you want here. Also not too sure where digitized speech is used. I think that's only in cutscenes. Alright, so music and effects hardware. This is where things get interesting. You can see a lot of things that are the same. The first 5, once again, are the same. These are FM synthesis, so you don't really want those. They're not really good. They're good for reference, but nothing else. They're of bad quality. Yeah, so the Pro Audio Spectrum is also here. It's also using the same chip, so it's not MIDI hardware as far as I know. So the interesting part is 7 to 0. So, in order to explain all of these, I need to delve a bit more into the sound card history, more than what I did cover in my Magic 3 Hours of Terror video. And I'll go in more or less chronological order. So, it is the year 1991, and the MIDI Manufacturers Association releases the General MIDI spec. It was quite an important milestone because General MIDI allowed consistent MIDI file playback on different hardware. In a sense, it does things like define that program 24 is an acoustic guitar, and program number 40 is a violin, and not any other way. And all the other instruments, of course. So, with that standard, it was guaranteed that on compliant hardware you can take the same MIDI file or use the same MIDI instrument, and you would get more or less the same instruments on any hardware. It was very important because finally there's a standard and everyone can base their work on it. The General MIDI spec was actually based on the MT32 from Roland, the one that was released in 1987. It was 4 years earlier. Yeah, so it was quite old at the time, actually. It was not based on the LAPC-I, unfortunately. So the additional sound effects that the LAPC-I had were not actually included in the General MIDI spec, which is quite unfortunate. Now, the General MIDI spec did actually add some more things on top of what the MT32 had. It did add some new sound effects, but it was just not enough to cover all the needs for games. So it was nice to have a new spec. It was not nice in that there was not enough different instrument types for all the sound effects that games needed. It was quite problematic, because defining a new standard to rectify this issue would have been a very difficult task, and it would take very long. So nobody really wanted to do that. And so by release, General MIDI was already outdated and not all that useful. Even for other applications, actually. It didn't have enough drums, for example. No variety in there. So it was quite unfortunate, really. So in 1991, Roland Corporation decided to create GS, which nobody really is certain what it stands for, maybe General Sound. It was another spec based on the General MIDI. It was basically a superset of General MIDI that added more drum variations and reintroduced pretty much the LAPC-I sound effects for games by adding a separate sound effects sound bank. So that was very nice, and finally games could depend on something that was a spec, even though it wasn't like officially adopted by the MIDI Manufacturers Association. But at least GS was fairly well defined. And on the same year, 1991, Roland Corporation released the Sound Canvas SC55, which was the first general MIDI compatible device in the world. Well, sort of. It was also a rack mount, actually. So it was neither a tabletop nor a sound card. So it was kind of like a server device for all the sound professionals. Interestingly enough, the SC55 was also the first GS-compatible device, and it had a way to switch between GS mode and GM mode. Well, General MIDI, I mean. Except, some of them were actually buggy, and didn't switch between the two correctly. Those were stuck in GS-only mode. So, that's quite unfortunate. The flagship of the general MIDI spec had a bug that made it not compatible with the general MIDI spec. Good job. And in general, the SC55 actually had certain hardware bugs, but it was still very good as far as hardware goes, so it became extremely popular anyway. So for example, all the Doom music was composed on the SC55 or its variants. And same goes for the World of XEEN, at least one of the things that the developers focused on. Especially the SC55, including the hardware bugs. And unfortunately, World of XEEN actually relies on some of the hardware bugs to do all the right playback. It is very unfortunate, but what can you do? Anyway, let's go to year 1992. That year, Roland released the SC155, which was a tabletop version of the SC55, and they also released the SCC1, which was a sound card version of the SC55. All of these use the same sound chip as the SC55, so basically anything that applies to SC55 applies to both of the other two, and vice versa. Also of note, on the same year, 1992, the SC7 was released, which was a budget version of the SC55, in that it only supported general MIDI and not GS. So it had the fewer instrument types and didn't have all the game-specific sound banks and whatnot. But it was cheaper. Then, in 1993, Roland released RAP-10, which was a sound card version of the SC7. Once again, only supporting general MIDI and not general sound. And also, on the same year, Roland released the SC55 Mark II, which was a refresh of the SC55 that fixed many of the hardware bugs, and broke all the games that relied on the bugs, like World of XEEN. Yeah. So in fact, you will not get correct playback if you have an original SC55 Mark II. Only if you have an original SC55, the first edition. Yeah. So that's what Roland were doing at the time. But let's go 1 year back to 1992, and let's see what Creative Technology were up to. So that year, they released the Sound Blaster 16. Once again, I mentioned that it was an incredible success due to its backwards compatibility, that was quite unrivaled, and also its ability to use the Wave Blaster, and having it use a Wave Blaster port. Now that was a brilliant idea. The Sound Blaster 16 allowed connecting an add-on card, called a daughterboard, to it through the Wave Blaster port. And the port is called after the Creative Wave Blaster itself. It was a daughterboard that I think shipped together with the Sound Blaster 16. And all of the daughterboards connecting through the Wave Blaster port provided MIDI playback to the Sound Blaster 16. So all in all, the Sound Blaster 16 was a very convenient all-in-one solution, because it could do everything. It could play back MIDI, it could play FM synthesis, it could do speech synthesis, it could play back simple audio files, PCM and whatnot. So it was very convenient because it supported pretty much everything. The Wave Blaster itself, however, it wasn't very good. The instruments were wrongly balanced compared to Roland's equipment. The samples were of poor quality, but I'm pretty sure that pretty much that was exactly what Creative had expected. Because, after all, Creative were just entering the MIDI market with the Sound Blaster 16. They couldn't really hope to compete with Roland or Yamaha, who had been producing professional MIDI solutions for years at that point. And they had everything already sorted out. They didn't really have any means to create a daughterboard that would have near quality of Roland and Yamaha equipment. But that's where their design of Sound Blaster 16 paid off. The Wave Blaster itself was implemented as a daughterboard, which allowed Roland to make its own Wave Blaster compliant daughterboards, which completely outcompeted the original Wave Blaster. But Creative were quite happy with that. After all, consumers would buy a daughterboard from Roland, and would also buy a Sound Blaster 16 from Creative, benefiting both companies. So everyone was very happy with that. Well, except competitors, I guess. Now, fast forward to 1995, and Roland releases the SCB-55, which was the Wave Blaster daughterboard version of the SC-55, or the SC-155, or the SCC-1. And the same year they also released the SCB-7, the daughterboard version of the SC-7 or the RAP-10. So yes, that's that. So let's go back to audio configuration and how all the sound card history ties into that. So I covered 1 to 6 already, and yes, so I said they're not really interesting for us, but if you look at the rest of the things, you can see that number 9 is the Wave Blaster. That's the original Sound Blaster compliant Wave Blaster from Creative. It is shown as detected. I'm not too sure if that actually works, but I don't think it's very useful anyway. What you want to look at is, in fact, all of the other options marked as Roland. All of them are quite important, and it is crucial to know the difference between them. So, starting from number 8, the Roland LAPC-I option. Once again, this is a typo. This is incorrect. It's not the LAPC-1, it's LAPC-I, I for IBM. And it is by far not the MT32. Not even close. If you try to play it back on MT32 emulator or the MT32 itself, it will not work correctly. This is LAPC-I only. So this option is the correct option to use if you are using the MUNT emulator in LAPC-I mode, or the C32L, I think. Yeah. Do not use this option, number 8, for anything other than using MUNT, ever, or you will get incorrect audio playback. If you get piano instead of the sound effects like doors opening and footsteps, you are using this with incorrect setup. Once again, only MUNT should use the number 8 option, nothing else. Then, option 7. This, you can see it says Rule on Canvas GS. This is specifically for the Rule on Canvas SC55 or SC155 or SCC1 or the SCB55, not SC55 Mark II. And it is explicitly pointed out that this is GS. This is very important. It is GS for a reason. It is GS only, not general MIDI. So this option is for use with software synthesizers or hardware synthesizers, of course. So with things like Timidity or Fluid Synth. But make sure to check that the patches or sound fonts you use in Timidity or Fluid Synth support GS, not general MIDI. So if you have this option set and you can hear an alarm clock instead of doors opening, that means you're using GM instead of GS, and you should stop doing that. You have to find a sound font that is specifically for GS, or a patch set that is specifically for GS. Nothing else will work. Now, if you have a sound font that you really want to use, but it is general MIDI only, no, you should still probably find another one, but still, if you want to try it out, you want to select the option 0. This, once again, is a typo. This is not tap 10, this is rap 10. And it is, of course, meant for the SC7 or rap 10. So these instruments here are mapped for general MIDI compatibility. Once again, general MIDI does not support all of the needed sound effects, so you should prefer to use either 8 or 7, depending on whether you want to use an emulator or, well, if you have original hardware, of course, or 8, well, yeah, 8 for MUNT or 7 for Timidity or Fluid Synth. But yeah, if you do really need to try something with general MIDI, do select 0 for Fluid Synth and Timidity, and you can test it out. So yes, if actually you select number 0, I can show this off a bit. You select number 0. First it will ask for the Sound Blaster port I/O address. Everything is already preset, at least in DOSBox Game Launcher. It will automatically detect everything, so just press enter. Then it will ask for the tap 10 port I/O address. This is actually a rap 10 port I/O address once again. They keep doing typos in setups, that's very annoying. But the correct answer to this is 6, 0x330. That it was actually the standard MIDI port of the time, and DOSBox automatically understands what you want to connect if you select 6. And then, yeah, they will ask for some other things which are, once again, automatically detected. So yes, that's that. And then, going back to the DOSBox Game Launcher configuration. So here I am in the Audio tab, and one very important thing to note is that in the config you have to put 128:0 unless you are running on some custom MIDI port or something else is already running on 1280. This is standard and should work on everything, but do make note if your MIDI server shows anything different. But it should work for like 95% of the time. Okay, then this mixer command thing. This allows you to change audio levels. So if in the game you find that speech is too loud or too quiet, you can change the volume here. So the important part is the Sound Blaster, because that's what you want to use for the speech. So you can change it. The audio balance is actually very different between the 3 modes of Roland in the setup program. So do make sure to change the mixer command appropriately. And other things I left on default. If you do use the Sound Blaster option as the music option, you will want to set OPL EMU to compat, not too fast, and the default is fast. But otherwise, yeah, the defaults are quite good. So yes, that's all I want to cover about the audio. So the best option, in my opinion, is either to use MUNT, which will guarantee you that you will get correct playback for everything, but I think that the LAPC-I didn't really have as many effect types as GS. So I think you can actually get better results by using Timidity or Fluid Synth with the GS option. The problem is that finding sound fonts that correctly play back is difficult, and probably you can find the best one for World of XEEN would probably be something that emulates the SC55 itself. There are some sound fonts that do that, but well, I will show them off in my playthrough, and I will let you decide for yourself. They're not bad, but still some notes I think are not entirely correctly balanced and whatnot. So yeah, it's really your choice, and you have to experiment quite a bit with all of that. But yeah, so that's that for audio. Let's move to the other tabs for DOSBox Game Launcher. So let's go to display. Now here, you need to make sure to enable aspect correction. Unfortunately, World of XEEN is exactly the same as Might and Magic 3 Hours of Terra in that it has very weird setup where the 3D viewport doesn't need aspect correction and your interface does. It is more important to actually enable aspect correction so you could get correct mouse movement. At least that. And all the portraits would be of correct aspect ratio. I think it does stretch a bit the 3D viewport, but I think it's the lesser of the two evils. And of course you want to select whatever scalars you want to use. I like to use the normal 3x scalar. It works quite nicely. Yeah, so this is everything in here. Then the machine tab. The important part is the cycles. 2 options are pretty good for World of XEEN. So on one hand, you can actually select max to get the best responsiveness and pretty much eliminate all the loading times. Unlike My Magic 3 Hours of Terra, World of XEEN is actually pretty good at handling max cycles. And this is definitely one of the better options to use. The problem with max cycles, even though it's very nicely responsive and it's always nice to not have loading times, but the cutscenes in Clouds of XEEN will not play at the correct speed. They will be super fast. So if you want to watch cutscenes in Clouds of XEEN, not so much Darkside of XEEN, you want to enter 7000 here. And that's a pretty good compromise. I guess you could keep this at 7000 at all times, because also the game over screen also is a bit too fast if you put on max. It's not terribly fast, but still, it's nicer at 7000. And it isn't really too non-responsive or slow at 7000, but it's just not quite as nice as max cycles. So it's really your choice. And I guess I will also try both of them when playing the game. Then next, in I/O, very important, disable auto lock. You don't need this, because actually the game is made very nicely and there is mouse pointer integration. So it's very nice to not need auto lock. Then in the mounting tab, you don't need to change anything in the other tabs. So the mounting tab is something important to get the CD audio running correctly. First, you need to mount C as wherever you want to install it. I mounted it on one of the things that I have set up. It's just the folder mounted as drive C. You do that by just pressing add, choosing C as the drive letter, mounting a directory, and that's that. And you get this line here. You can see it here. Then you need to make sure to also add a new one and put it to mount image. And you want to put both Q files for the CDs. And yeah, choose mount as ISO, and that is everything. This is very important that you put both Q files on the same image mount command, because that will allow you to switch between them at runtime, which is crucial when running this game. Also, the reason why these are Q files is because you cannot actually put CD audio into ISO files. So don't even try if you have an original CD. You need to rip it into Q files. Yes, and then you have the main and setup. The main points to wherever you installed it, xeen.exe, and setup points to the install.exe. If you haven't installed it yet, point them into the mounted image. Well, actually, you can just press booter or something, or point it into any exe on your drive. And then if you don't have it installed, let me show this. So if you don't have it installed in the DOSBox game launcher, what you want to do is right-click on it and press start manually. You will get something like this. You will get a prompt, and you will have the disk mounted on the D drive. If you put D, you can put dir to see that it is in fact the CD that you want. And then all you need to do is do install.exe, and you will start running the same setup program as you can see in here. And you can just choose what to install it to. Use the C drive, because that's what you have mounted it on, and you can choose any subfolder or whatnot that you want. And yes, so I'll choose 9, 8, enter, 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 install with this. when it asks you whether you want to automatically adjust volumes, it doesn't really matter. If you want the volumes to be the same throughout, you can select no, but I'm not sure if it really makes any difference. And then you have special file installation. You can install some of these into the disk instead of having it read from the CD. But if you are mounting not a real disk, but a pair of cues, I don't think it's really worthwhile to do that, because reading from the disk is just as fast as reading from the, well, hard drive. So you can just press enter. And that's it. Then you can select in here to put into mounting the Xeen exe and install.exe, and then you can, from then on, launch it with simple run, or run the setup with run setup. So yes, that is everything. Well, one thing to point out is that in the game, if I launch it, I don't have the audio set up right now, not launching the Mont emulator, but it doesn't matter. If you want to load something from the Darkside, it will say, please insert World of XEEN CD-ROM Disk 2. In order to get this to work, so it would flip CDs for you, you need to enter the key combination that does it. So in this screen, you need to press Ctrl F4. Also make sure that it's not bound anywhere else. Like right now I'm running this on KDE Plasma 5, and Ctrl F4 is bound to KWin. So make sure to unbind it first, or else it won't work. So Ctrl F4, and then make sure to press enter. No other key, as far as I know, will work, but if you press enter, things will get loaded quite nicely. So yes, that is everything I wanted to cover here. And if you have any more questions, do post in the comments. And I will see you all in my main playthrough of Might and Magic World of XEEN. See y'all then. Later.